Hey there! This video is going to be a deep dive comparison between three popular drop-in variable ND filters. We have the Breakthrough, Canon, and Meike. So, disclaimer up front here, Breakthrough did send me a few of their filters to test out and review, but they didn't pay me anything. They don't get to see this video before it goes up. And of course, the opinion about everything is my own. Other than the Breakthrough filters, everything else I purchased with my own money. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about what these are. So first of all, these are for when you're using EF lenses on an RF mount camera. So I just want to make sure everyone understands what's going on here. So first of all, we have the basic Canon adapter. And one of the coolest things about the RF mount cameras is that you can easily adapt older EF mount lenses. So with this adapter here, this is the basic pass-through adapter. So this will take an EF lens and put it on an RF mount camera. And you can see from this, there's nothing going on here. So this doesn't do anything. This just adapts the lens. Now, what's unique about this is that DSLR lenses needed a longer flange distance. So we have this extra space here, and what that allows us to do is put filters in there, which is really cool. And one of the coolest things about this whole adapting filter system. Now, Canon makes a few different adapters. They make one with a control ring, but they also make this adapter here, which again is from EF to RF. And because of the extra space, like I said before, we have this slot here where we can put in filters. So this is the variable ND filter, which we're going to be focusing on today, but they also make a circular polarizer that goes in there and a clear filter. Now, when you buy the Meike adapter, it comes with the adapter, and it also comes with their variable ND filter, and it comes with the clear filter. But when you buy the Breakthrough, it just comes with the actual filter, and we'll talk about pricing and all the options and stuff later. Now, they did say that when I asked Breakthrough about it, they did recommend that you use this in the Canon adapter and not the Meike adapter. But I said we'll get into all that stuff later. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about in terms of comparing these filters is the build quality and sort of the usability of them. So if you take a look at these three filters here, they all look pretty similar. In fact, two of them look really similar. And they basically all work the same way. And so basically you have the filter in the middle there, and then what you operate, there's a little dial here to change the strength of the ND filter. So you just rotate this and you can make it lighter and darker. And then they have a button to release the filter and slide it out. So the two filters here, this is the Canon filter and this is the Meike filter. In my opinion, they are pretty much identical. I think Meike basically copied this when they made it. In terms of the build quality and also just the dial and the buttons, they are pretty much identical. There's pretty much no difference from what I can tell between the two of them. I don't think either one is made better than the other one. Now, one thing I have to say about the Breakthrough one is I absolutely love the build quality. I think this is a big plus for the Breakthrough. One thing that I had complaints about with the other adapters is the dial. This one has a much larger dial, and the cool thing about this larger dial is it's a little bit stiffer, so it doesn't slide around as easy, but it's also really easy to operate. And it also has a really nice button. So build quality overall, huge advantage for the Breakthrough. So I did two different tests to take a look at the differences between light transmission and color shifts between the three filters. So I want to briefly talk about how I did the test so you can understand what's going on. So first of all, I used the Canon R5 in the standard picture profile. So I did not shoot in log. And when I brought it into the computer, I didn't do any exposure or color adjustments whatsoever. So the images that you're going to see are directly out of the camera. The reason I did it this way is I didn't want to have any bias in color grading or anything, so I kept everything as consistent as possible. I shot everything in 4K 24 fine, the white balance was set to sunny, and I used the exposure meter in the camera to judge exposure. Now, I know this is generally not a very accurate way to do this, but it was the best way I could try to be consistent between everything that was going on here. And the camera was locked off and the lighting wasn't changing. Even when I was outside, it was a fully sunny day and there wasn't any shifts in lighting. In terms of the lens, I used the Sigma Art 28mm EF lens, which is the best EF lens that I own. It's actually a fantastic lens and usually the lens that I'm using in the studio. So to adjust the exposure in the camera, I used shutter speed to account for the changes of neutral density of the filters as I tested at different amounts of neutral density. Now, the reason I use shutter speed is because I didn't want to change the light intensity or the aperture because I wanted to keep everything as consistent as possible. So when I maxed out the shutter speed at 1/4000, it allowed me to have an opening of 0 to 9 stops before having to change the aperture. So after 9 stops, I had to use the aperture, but from 0 to 9 stops, it was just with shutter speed. Now, the outdoor tests were done on a really sunny day and the lighting really wasn't changing. And then the indoor test, of course, was with controlled lighting. Starting out with the outdoor test here, this is where the filters were all set to a minimum. And because this is 1 2/3 stops over and the three filters look a little overexposed, I would say that the filtration starts probably around 1 stop over. So it's definitely less than 1.5. Now this is where I start to adjust the filters to get proper exposure in the camera. So this is still at 1 2/3 stops, but I've adjusted the filters so that they get proper exposure at 1 2/3 stops. And taking a look at the 3 images, I think they all look pretty good. And here is at 3 stops overexposed with everything adjusted properly with the ND filters. Now you start to see a little bit of difference in the colors, but I think all 3 are generally pretty clean and usable, and I think they could be adjusted in post. We'll take a look more inside about the differences. 6 stops overexposed. Again, you're taking a look here, look at the, the color of the road, the green and the blue. You can definitely start to see some differences between these different filters. But again, as I said, I think they're all very usable. Now, one thing that's an issue is when you get up to the upper range here at 9 stops overexposed, the Canon turns completely blue, somewhere around 7 or 8 stops over, and is really unusable at this point. I think most of you who are watching this know that, this has an issue with the Canon filter, and it's just really unusable in those higher stops. And lastly, when you max out the filters and then adjust the camera to get proper exposure, they maxed out the Breakthrough and the Meike at 9 1/3 stops over, and the Canon at 9 2/3 stops over, although unusable at that higher range. So based on these tests outside, I would have to say that in terms of light transmission, although the Meike and Canon are rated at 1.5 to 9 stops, and the Breakthrough is rated at 1.5 to 11 stops, the Meike and the Breakthrough are good from about 1 to 9 1/3 stops. And then the Canon, although got proper exposure at 9 2/3 stops, is really unusable from like above 7 or 8 stops. But they all start a little bit lower than advertised. All right, now for the indoor test, I used the same light intensity and everything else stayed consistent, just like I did outside, and adjusted shutter speed. And I used a color checker chart under a constant light source. And the reason I do this is that you can then take this into the computer, which I'll show you in a second, and really analyze the colors based on the color chart. So again, this is the same way I did it outside. This is with the filter set to minimum. And once I zoom in, you will probably be able to see that, the exposure is definitely different between these 3 filters compared to the no filter. So again, this is 1 2/3 stops over, and you can see that all 3 filters are slightly overexposed like we had outside. So this shows that they do start lower than 1.5 stops. So this is with the filters adjusted based on that 1 2/3 stops overexposure. And as you're taking a look here and looking at the colors, you can probably see a difference in the middle gray, what you see on the left-hand side of all of the different filters. You can really tell quickly that there is more of a color shift going on with the Meike and the Breakthrough, and the Canon is much closer to the no filter whatsoever. So this is at 3 stops overexposed. And as you go up through the range, it stays pretty consistent. So this would be at 6 stops overexposed. And again, everything is staying pretty consistent in terms of the color shifts. But one thing you notice is that the 3 filters add a little bit of saturation, which is really interesting. And this will become more clear when we take a look in the computer and look at the scopes. And then lastly, at 9 stops overexposed, consistent results with what we got outside. The Canon filter, of course, has that nasty blue shift and becomes unusable, while the other 2 sort of stay pretty consistent. Now, I didn't notice any significant vignetting or the X patterns or any loss in clarity between the 3 filters, other than that blue color shift on the Canon at the higher ND levels, which I've already talked about a few times. So now I want to go into the computer and take a look at the vector scope with the color chart, and you can really clearly see what's going on with the color shifts. So in the computer here, we can use the vector scope in combination with the clips with the color checker, because that will allow us to really check for color accuracy. So if you're not familiar with this over here, this is the vector scope. It's one of the scopes that are available in every editing software. And basically this shows you all the color accuracy and the saturation levels, and it's super handy. I often use it for skin tones. But what we can do here is, because we shot all of these in the same conditions and we use the same test chart, we can use that to talk about this. And one of the reasons why we use the color checker and why they're so expensive is because the colors on here are very accurate and they correspond with the colors in the vector scope. So the magenta, red, yellow, green, cyan, and blue are all corresponding with the color, with the little chips on here. And also all these lines over here are going to have to do with the skin tone lines that are on the color checker as well. Now, the reason why you see so many different lines here are that we're looking at all 4 laid on top of each other. So the way that they aim at the boxes will tell our color accuracy, and how much they stick out will tell us how much saturation we have. So as I said before, we can use this to check color accuracy, but we can also adjust the color. So I made a video about how to adjust color accuracy and stuff. I'll leave that link down below. So first of all, let me toggle everything off except for the one that doesn't have a filter. So that's this one here. And what we can see here is that all of the colors are very accurate. So the magenta is aimed at magenta, the red's aimed at red, the yellow's aimed at yellow, the green's a little bit off actually, but not too bad, and the blue is aimed at blue. So these are very, very accurate, and this is what you'd expect when you're not using a filter. Every single variable ND filter has some sort of color shift, so what we want to do is take a look and see what's going on here. So first of all, let me turn the Canon one on, and you can see as I toggle it on and off, it's, as I said, more saturated, which we noticed in the image, so it sticks out further. But what I notice here is that it's very accurate. Like the colors, so the yellow has a little bit of a shift here, but the magenta, the red, the blue is a little shift, the green's pretty accurate, the cyan's pretty accurate. Overall, I would say that the colors are very, very accurate compared to not having a filter on there. Now, let's look at the breakthrough. So when we toggle the breakthrough on, you can see there's a clear shift in colors going on here. And the magenta's shifted a little bit, but it's still aimed pretty much at the magenta. The big shifts are going on here with the red pushing towards yellow and the green pushing towards yellow and the yellow pushing towards yellow. Also, you can see the skin tones have now shifted off of this closer to yellow. So there's definitely a color shift going on here with the breakthrough as we toggle it on and off. This is no filter. This is the breakthrough. And then what I want to do here is also take a look at the Meike. So let's turn the Meike on. And you can see that it has a similar color shift as we saw in the outdoor example to the breakthrough. So on and off, it is definitely shifting again a little bit more towards yellow, and the yellow is shifting a little bit towards red, but the skin tone is a little bit more accurate. So again, let's compare now with the breakthrough. So this is the breakthrough toggling on and off, and you can see the breakthrough has a little bit more of a color shift. You can see with this, with the red here, right? And the skin tones. So again, like we saw in the outdoor examples, I thought the Meike and the breakthrough looked very similar, but the Meike shift, or the breakthrough shifting just a little bit more, with the Canon being the most accurate. So this is all with 3 stops. So if we go over here to looking at where it is 6 stops, again, very similar story. If you're looking at those two, the Meike and the breakthrough, and then if you look at just the Canon, you can see it still holds color really, really well. And then as we were saying before, if we go over to the 9 stops, you can see that the Canon is an absolute disaster like we were saying before. So if I turn off the other ones, you can see how far the Canon shifts. So this is no filter. This is the Canon. You can see it's shifting really far towards blue like we saw in the images, but you can see everything here is pushing over towards blue. So hopefully this gives you a good sense of what's going on here. This is a really accurate way of checking colors on anything that you're doing, and adjusting colors and white balance and all that kind of stuff. Before I get on to my conclusion and recommendations, I just want to take a moment to talk about the fact that Breakthrough has a lot of really cool drop-in filters. Now, Canon and Meike, they only have a couple, but Breakthrough has a whole bunch. So in addition to the variable NDs, like I've been talking about throughout this video, they also make circular polarizers, solid stop NDs, clear filters, autumn and night sky, infrared, and black and white CPL filters. So the 2 additional filters they sent me, in addition to the VND, these are all the X4 varieties. They sent me the CPL, which is the polarizer, and also the night sky. So I want to quickly demonstrate these before I get on to the conclusions. So let me show you this cool circular polarizer from Breakthrough in action. And if you're not sure what a circular polarizer does, there's a lot of photography applications, but in terms of videography, one of the most common uses is for shooting through a window because there's a lot of reflections on here. But you can also use it when you're shooting on the water and basically taking layers off of reflections and things like that. So right now you can't see through the windshield because of the reflection of the light off of the windshield. And so if I get in the car, you can't see me at all. So let's put the circular polarizer on there and I'll show you what that does. All right, so now I got the circular polarizer in there and you can see it doesn't look very different, but as I rotate the knob on the side, it will shift the polarization and you can magically see through the windshield. So let me go inside the car now and I'll show you what that looks like. So pretty cool to have that tool in your toolbox to be able to just pop in that other drop-in filter, and now you have a circular polarizer. So now I want to take a moment to talk about this guy here, which is the night sky filter. And as you can see, it looks pretty cool. Now, I'm not much of an astrophotographer, but I did take this out for a quick test to see what it could do, because it's just fascinating to me how many drop-in filters they have available. So taking this outside, I did do a time lapse with my R5, and the first one I shot with the basic pass-through adapter, and this is what it looks like. And again, I don't have much experience with this, but it was a lot of fun. And then this is with the night sky filter. There is definitely a different color and look to it. I didn't do anything in post to change this whatsoever, but it was pretty cool to have another option with this, and I'd like to try playing around with this a little bit more. So as I said, big thanks to Breakthrough for sending these out for testing. And if you're interested in lots of different drop-in filters, they have a whole bunch to check out, and I'll leave a link down below. Now on to the conclusions and then my recommendations. So first of all, in terms of color accuracy, hands down Canon up to a point where that blue shift happens. So if you're gonna be in that like 1 to 7 stop ND range, I would recommend the Canon in terms of the overall color accuracy. It really was the most accurate in terms of the color shift. The Meike and the Breakthrough were similar in terms of color, but I have to give a slight edge to the Meike, but they were very, very similar and both consistent throughout the range, so it would probably be pretty easy to correct. Now, in terms of build quality and user experience, like I mentioned earlier on in the video, I have to give it to Breakthrough. It is definitely a much nicer build quality, and the controls on it are definitely superior. So part of this discussion, of course, has to come down to the actual adapters themselves, because there's pricing and compatibility and all that kind of stuff. I don't have any issues with the Meike adapter. I have tested this in the past and didn't have any issues with autofocus and stuff like that. But when I have the choice between first party OEM like Canon and third party, I almost always will choose Canon, because you just have the potential of things to go wrong with a third party adapter versus the Canon, in my opinion, is probably going to be more reliable in more situations. But that being said, I haven't had any issues with the Meike. The reason I'm talking about this is sort of the interchangeability and usability with the different filters. So as I said earlier, Breakthrough told me that their filters are not going to work on the Meike filter. And when I asked them, they said our filters were designed to use on the Canon EF to RF drop-in filter adapter and are not compatible with the Meike EF to RF adapter, as there is a defect on the flange depth. So I did try it just because I was curious, and I did put the Breakthrough in the Meike, and I put it in the camera, and it seemed to work. It's autofocus worked and all that stuff, but again, your mileage may vary. I don't usually like to break a manufacturer's recommendation, but these all are designed so they all click into the other filters, and they do physically fit, but your mileage may vary, and I'm not going to guarantee that the Breakthrough works on the Meike. So your next question might be, does Breakthrough make an EF to RF adapter? Well, they don't currently, and when I asked Breakthrough about it, they said that they are working on it, but there is no ETA for when that's going to become available. But they do currently offer a really nice PL to RF adapter on their website. It's a little pricey, but it does look really, really nice. Now let's get on to pricing, which is where this gets really, really interesting. So as far as I can tell, you can't just buy the Canon adapter without a filter. If you can, I just couldn't find it, so maybe it is a possibility, but as far as I can tell, you have to buy it with one of the filters. So if you buy the adapter with the variable ND filter, it's $399. Now, if you buy the VND on its own, it's $359. If you buy the Canon filter adapter with the polarizer, it's $299. The polarizer on its own is $249. If you want the Canon clear filter, which slides in, it's $130, which I usually don't recommend, because I would rather just swap this out with the pass-through adapter, and then you don't have any extra glass in there, and it works perfectly fine. Now, when you talk about the Meike, this is the best value option for sure. When you buy the adapter, it also comes with the VND and the clear filter for $160. So in terms of budget, this is definitely going to give you the most bang for your buck for the price. It's incredible how cheap it is. And I think a lot of people will probably go this direction. But for me personally, I'm always going for ultimate reliability and ultimate image quality. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. In terms of Breakthrough, so the X4 VND, which is what we've been talking about so far, is $289. So when you compare this against the Canon on its own is $359. It's cheaper, but you have to buy, like maybe you'd have to buy the Canon adapter and the polarizer and then buy the X4 VND, those sorts of things. The CPL, which I was talking about from Breakthrough earlier on, is $249, so that's the same price as the Canon one. And then the Night Sky filter is $179. So this whole thing gets a little bit more complicated when you're trying to figure out which other filters you need, and also, the different adapters. If you're going to be getting a bunch of drop-in filters from Breakthrough, then I think that kind of makes more sense to get the Canon adapter and then get a bunch of filters, because they have a lot more options there. But a lot of different options in terms of the adapters and the filters. All right, so let me try to wrap this up, because this video is getting pretty lengthy. Now, I don't have any obvious winner here or clear recommendations, other than the fact that if you're on a budget, get the Meike. It's $160. It works really well. Really no surprises there. I haven't had any issues with it. Now, what were my surprises and takeaways about testing the breakthrough filter? Now, I've heard so many people rave about this filter, so I was really curious to test it out. Now, the surprises here were two things. One was the light transmission. Now, it's advertised from 1.5 to 11 stops, and I got around 1 to 9 1/3 stops. So that's a little disappointing, although I don't know if I'd ever need 10 or 11 stops of ND. That's a lot of ND. But again, it's different from as advertised. Now, in terms of the colors, this was really surprised me. I expected the breakthrough to have the most accurate colors because of, people recommending it and using it and liking the filter. But I was really blown away with how accurate the Canon filter was in terms of having no color shift, basically, up until that, as I said, that 7 or 8 stops over where it goes completely blue. So between those two, obviously the breakthrough has way better build quality. I really do like the wheel on it. It is way easier to work out in the field, and it's stiffer and it's bigger and easier to adjust. So that goes a long way with me. I think the color shifts are fairly minor and easy to adjust. Every variable ND filter has a color shift of some sort. So there's pros and cons with all this stuff. I will leave links down in the description below if you want to pick up any of this stuff. And huge thanks to Breakthrough for sending out their filters for me to test and review. Thank you all for watching. And if you did enjoy this, please hit subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.